Star Power, trip of a lifetime. Let's fucking go. All right, so this episode is sexual identity as a construct. These recordings might be the accounts of the most closeted homosexual in the history of the universe refusing to accept his sexuality. I don't know what I believe, but basing it off of how I experience life, I don't know if I believe in homosexuals per se. But I don't necessarily believe in heterosexuals either. I think everybody's just motherfucking here. The construct that we've created with heterosexuals is if you're a heterosexual male, that means you're disgusted by a rock hard, massive cock blasting load. That's absolutely disgusting to you because you're straight as fuck. And if you're not disgusted looking at that, then you're gay. If you're a heterosexual male, it means you hate touching or even looking at a chiseled six-pack, unless, of course, it's your body, then you worship it. That's all of sexuality is as cut and dry as we make it out to be, and if everybody's actually as straight as they say they are. I don't believe sexuality is cut and dry, though. I do believe there's a male-female mutual attraction of energy, kind of like a yin-yang or a positive-negative charge, that has to exist to drive the known universe forward. But I think the idea that you're either cut and dry heterosexual or homosexual might be a construct we've created as a society. I think the truth is every single person on planet Earth is technically bisexual. I think we're all a piece of the same neutral energy, and our behavior as human beings is controlled by the pattern of variables that we're a reflection of. We're all prisoners to different roots of nature, and we're all imprisoned by the nature that we're each individually controlled by. So we're essentially prisoners to the pattern of our nature, and our sexuality is the ultimate reflection of it. I think someone's sexuality is an evolving pattern of their nature with deep-rooted stems. And maybe that does result in the majority of the population being heterosexual and a minority homosexual. I just don't think sexuality is cut and dry like gender is, where you're either born one or the other. And I don't think sexuality is random. I think it's just a perfect storm of variables that subconsciously pushes someone in either or direction. A phrase I like to use is fucked up wiring. I'm referring to a pattern that's embedded deep into our nature, tangling up throughout generations, and then eventually it surfaces manifesting through one person. It's almost like ever since conception, then nature flipped the balance on them and decided it's better to thrive in a homosexual existence than a flounder in a heterosexual one. It was a subconscious decision decided by their nature prior to them emerging into consciousness. It might be. It's just throwing ideas out there. But I believe this type of stuff is built into our programming and affects our operating systems like a computer. It's almost like if your hardware is miswired, then your software is glitchy and malfunctions. And maybe it's just that I'm a homosexual, but I just think the sheer taboo nature of homoerotic thoughts is arousing. It's really the ultimate forbidden fruit. But I look at homosexuality as being embedded into the fabric of nature, existing on the fringes, and some people's internal wiring pushes them out there. And I differentiate taking part in homosexuality from being born as a cut and dry homosexual. Here's my definition of a homosexual: the inability to perform sexually and be aroused by the opposite gender under any circumstances. That's my definition. It's not the real definition, but it's based off of how we construct sexual identity as a society when we make it out to be cut and dry. A heterosexual is incapable of being aroused by the same gender, and a homosexual is incapable of being aroused by the opposite gender. And someone might say there's a lot more to sexual identity than just sex. What about love? When we categorize sexual identity, we associate it solely on sexual preference opposed to love. I don't buy into the fact that some men are born loving women and some men are born loving men. People love people. And obviously, intimate love is different than love for friends and family, but our intimate love always revolves around sexual activity. We won't accept it if another male identifies as heterosexual because he intimately loves women, but he's only sexually active with men. That's what we call a closet man in our society. If he's married to a woman, but he's sexually active with men, he can't be like, oh no, I'm a heterosexual because I love women. I just like to have sex with men. We would deem him as a closeted homosexual. And never once throughout human history has any man ever identified as homosexual because he was born loving men, even though he fucks chicks. It's never happened. So the point is, when we classify our sexual identity as cut and dry, it's always based on sexual activity, and then intimate love revolves around that. Who we intimately love always follows who we get sexual with. And we do start to quote unquote like people before we reach ages of sexuality, but that means nothing. I like girls growing up, but that might just be a construct, I believe, created by society because I knew it's not cool to be gay. It doesn't mean I'm heterosexual just because I like girls growing up. And it's the same thing with boys who like boys at a young age. It might just be a construct they created because they knew they didn't fit into the box of their gender role. And then they hear straight or gay, and it's the first construct that makes sense to them. It's the first box they could put themselves into. And that's another thing. We're interrupting the developmental process of children in all facets of life because everything right now is so sped up and information is so readily available. 6-year-old children shouldn't even be thinking about their sexuality. An important concept is how much our behavior is controlled by where we fall on the spectrum of masculinity or femininity, depending on if you're a boy or a girl. It's all subconscious, but a male child realizing he's not masculine and a female child realizing she's not feminine is the first hurdle some people have to climb as human beings. It's the first wall some people run into. I think those feelings, kids who always knew they were gay, directly align with boys who just don't feel masculine and girls who don't feel feminine. It's rare that you see males who are good athletically say they always knew they were gay and had crushes on the boys they played sports with. Exceptions exist, but it's almost always the kids who took dance classes and have feminine energy who say, quote unquote, they always knew. But it seems like it's primarily only boys who are not masculine who grew up liking other boys and internally identify as gay at a young age. It's because they always knew they felt different in some way, and then they hear this construct of straight or gay, and they finally find an identity that makes sense to them because their gender role didn't. And then that's what's happening with children thinking they're transsexual these days, in my opinion. These children feel different, and then we're planting the seed in their heads that maybe they're transsexual when they used to feel different. The only construct they could relate it to was that they're gay. But now they can identify as trans. How many 6-year-old children would feel they're transgender if they've never even been introduced to the concept? I think the feeling that kids are misidentifying, though, is really just boys not feeling masculine and girls not feeling feminine. And when you mix that with the constructs that society creates and introduces to children at a young age while they're in their primary stages of development, I think we confuse children. A child that already feels lost is going to look for anything that makes sense to them to identify with when they don't feel like they identify with the box that they've been pegged into since their consciousness emerged. Just like I don't think sexuality is cut and dry, I think almost nothing in life is cut and dry. I'm going to use stuttering as the analogy, and it might seem like it's such a ridiculous analogy to compare stuttering to sexuality, but I think it works really well because performing sexually and talking without stuttering are both examples of something that can get people inside their head and out of the moment. And you never really hear getting in your head in relation to sexual performance. It's either you instantly get your dick hard, you have erectile dysfunction, or you're gay. So a quick disclaimer is I'm going to be referring to being incapable of performing sexually for the opposite gender as like an undesirable condition. I don't mean it like that. There's nothing wrong with people who live homosexual lifestyles. But so back to the analogy that I briefly mentioned of stuttering and sexual struggles. The question I have about both is, do the deepest roots stem mentally, physically, or a combination of the two? And if it's a combination of the two, which comes first? Is there some type of physical disability causing people to get in their heads? Or is there a deep-rooted mental issue creating some type of physical reflection of it? Or does it vary by the person? If some people are mentally manifesting it, it might still stem from a minor ailment which limits them physically. So it might be a minor physical thing affecting them, then them totally getting in their head and then creating a physical deficiency. It's a thin line between something being mental or physical because the two are so connected. I don't have anything physically causing me to stutter, but there's something preventing me from being as well-spoken as someone like Barack Obama. And it's not that I'm just in my head. It's not physically possible for me to consistently speak as clear as Barack Obama does. And Barack Obama is an extreme example. If you're watching this and you've probably seen Kill Tony, and Tony Hinchcliffe speaks mad clearly. I couldn't consistently speak as well as him. The best analogy of what my struggle is in all facets of life is I have difficulty adjusting to the speed. Everything always seems to move too fast for me to react in time. But since it seems like everything is going so fast for me in life, I end up trying to move too fast and I do everything in one motion. You often hear football players, but specifically quarterbacks transitioning into the NFL say it's the speed of the game that requires the biggest adjustment. And they say this because probably for the first time ever in their lives, everything is moving too fast for them. The game is moving quicker than they can react to it. And when that happens, you get anxious and you try to move too fast. And that's the thing about people with good reaction times. Even people with good reaction times, the more you speed up the life in front of them, the tougher it is to react to it. But so talking about getting anxious and trying to move too fast, I do this subconsciously with everything, but it really reflects when I talk. No one ever clowned on me for stuttering when I was growing up, and that's how you know stuttering wasn't an issue for me, because anything that was an issue for me, 1,000 people were there clowning on me for it. But now I notice I constantly stutter. Sometimes I stutter on the word I'm about to say, and sometimes this is what usually happens. I combine two words because I'm trying to talk so fast. It's like I try to say both words at the same time, and it's exactly my problem sexually. It's like I expect to do everything instantly in one motion. I expect it to go right from making a move straight to hard sex. And I expect that there's something wrong with me if it's not going like that. And if you have asexual energy like I do, then when you make a move, there hasn't been any buildup. She's not into it. Neither am I. And neither person is ready for hard sex. It's like you're trying to go straight from first to fourth gear on a stick shift. And when you try to go straight from first to fourth gear, your car doesn't go mad quickly. Instead, the engine stalls. And prematurely ejaculating is like you're accelerating mad quickly. And not getting your dick hard is like your engine stalling. Disclaimer is I have struggled getting hard even before a real girl was ever in the equation. But I think a major reason is because when I started jerking off, I was prepubescent. If you start jerking off too early, I think it stunts your sexual growth. When I started jerking off, it wasn't fueled by arousal. But then I came across a homoerotic image and it turned me on out of the sheer taboo nature of it. And then going forward, I got super in my head when I would try to jerk off the pictures of girls. I felt pressure to get hard and be turned on. Otherwise, I figured it meant I was gay, which I might be. One thing I do know is I personally am not a cut and dry stutterer who's physically incapable of speaking without stuttering. Just like I believe I'm not a cut and dry homosexual who is physically incapable of performing sexually for women. But yet, since we paint it with a cut and dry brush where you're either or you're not, and because I stutter sometimes, and I have gotten off to homoerotic thoughts, and since it's stigmatized to be a stutterer or homosexual, I feel pressure to not be either. And I'm capable of getting in my head and believing that I'm a cut and dry stutterer or a cut and dry homosexual. And through believing it, we can manifest it. And I'm not even in my head about stuttering, even though I do stutter sometimes. I'm not in my head about stuttering for a few reasons. A difference between stuttering and homosexuality, and I say this tongue in cheek, but it's definitely a reason why I've gotten so deep in my head sexually. I could stutter here and there and not be a cut and dry stutterer. Whereas anyone who's ever had one homoerotic fantasy, it means they're homosexual. By society standards, we're talking. And internally, knowing how stigmatized being gay is, it creates pressure to not find homoerotic thoughts arousing, which just makes them even more of a turn on. It's the forbidden fruit. And when someone feels the pressure to not be gay, the pressure builds up. And when do you think they're really going to feel that pressure? The answer is when they're hooking up with a girl. And when you feel pressure, you get anxious and inside your head, and it hinders your performance. I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders at the thought of actually being with the girl, because internally I feel like my sexuality is on the line. Whereas the thought of being with the guy turns into complete freedom because there's no pressure to perform. If anything, it's inverse pressure. There's pressure to not perform. But I obviously feel mad pressure on the thought of hooking up with the girl. Not only is my sexuality on the line, but I also don't want to embarrass myself or waste her time. I personally never felt pressure to talk without stuttering. Stuttering was literally never an issue for me. So I never got in my head about stuttering. Specifically when I was developing how to talk, I just did it. And it's because we developed dialect at such a young age, I wasn't even aware of what stuttering was. So I wasn't in my head about it at all when I was developing. I got comfortable talking before I was aware of what stuttering was, so I wasn't even questioning if I had a stutter. I got in my head about sexuality right as my sexual development process was beginning. Kids develop sexually after they know what being gay is, whereas it wasn't until after I developed my dialect that I met kids with actual stutters and learned what stuttering was. I was already comfortable talking at that point, and I always thought of stuttering as like a physical thing. I never viewed it as anxiousness about talking, but when I stutter, that's what it is for me. It usually correlates with when I'm anxious about talking. When I feel pressure on talking is when I'm most likely to stutter. Plus, I stutter when I'm talking and I don't know what I'm about to say, but mainly when it's a combination of the two. I don't know exactly what I'm about to say, and there's pressure on me to talk specifically in an uncomfortable situation. If I have like a memorized speech and I'm speaking in front of a million people, even if I'm nervous, I'm not going to stutter because it's memorized, like as long as it's fully memorized. But if I have to give an off-the-cuff speech or a written speech, but it's not memorized, under those same circumstances, I'll probably end up stuttering every single word. And the difference is because I'm trying to formulate the words. But so to bring it back to the point I was making, the main reason I'm not in my head when I'm talking opposed to sexually is because I developed dialect before I was consciously aware of stuttering, whereas I was already aware of what being gay is when I started developing sexually. And a major difference between developing dialect and developing sexually is you can't practice performing sexually with a real girl like you can and have to practice talking. You have to talk every day, multiple times, ever since you start developing motor skills. You start talking before you're consciously aware of what's even going on. When I was struggling rapping on beat at first, I saw the developmental process that had to happen, and I realized I might never get right with girls because no girl, specifically a girl I want to fuck, is ever going to walk with me through this process. Plus, arousal is fickle. Just telling a girl it's going to be a process kills the sexual tension. So the problem with girls is you can't just practice it until you're ready because you need a girl to practice with. With rapping, I was able to just practice alone and rap to myself off beat for hours on end until I developed. I was even aware of the developmental process with talking because I was so young. My parents were the ones who probably watched me struggle with that process. But the point of it all is it's a developmental process. Everything in life is a developmental process, whether you're talking about talking, whether you're talking about rapping, whether you're talking about walking, whether you're talking about developing sexually. But the problem with the developmental process with sex is you need people to practice with. And you can't delay talking like you can delay hooking up with girls. In fact, trust me, girls will delay that process for you. But everybody talks. You don't get up to like 15 years old waiting for the first time you talk because you're scared you're going to stutter. If that was the case and you kept prolonging it, you would just keep adding more pressure to the first time you actually did try to talk. And you would be dreading it more and more as every day passed. You wouldn't be excited to talk like you're expected to be excited the first time you hook up with a girl. So I'm going to bring it back to the question whether we're dealing with something mental or physical here. Like I said, I've met people with stutter so bad that I just assumed it was physical opposed to mental. I always thought of stuttering as something that this person was born with. I never thought of stuttering as something possibly created from a deep-rooted internal anxiousness until I've noticed myself stuttering. And that's why I correlate it with performing sexually. In my universe, the two stem from the same roots, which is internal anxiousness. And when I get anxious, I get inside my head and out of the moment. When that happens, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and I'm going to perform worse at whatever I was anxious about doing. So it's a mental problem, but it's manifesting physically. But here's the thing. I'm giving an analogy from how I personally experienced life, where I'm associating stuttering and the inability to perform sexually primarily with anxiousness. I've met people who stutter so badly, it seems like something different than when I get tangled up on words and stutter. It seemed physical, like they were incapable of talking without stuttering. Just like I've met males so void of masculinity that it seems like they might be physically incapable of fucking a girl. So the excuse I'm making to hang on to my last thread of heterosexuality is, for me, it seems like stuttering and sexual performance might have a minor physical limitation causing me to get inside my head, magnifying any physical difficulties, whereas it seems like some other people might just be born physically incapable. So I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself, but I believe if I walked around saying I was born with the stutter, it would be dishonest. Just like I do believe if I walked around saying I was born a homosexual, I think it would be dishonest. But so if stuttering is cut and dry for some people, and some people are physically born stuttering and it's impossible to ever do anything about it, then I believe people are physically born homosexual and they're physically incapable of performing sexually for the opposite gender. But if stuttering is not physical, then in my opinion, stuttering and sexuality are one and the same. But some people might just be born with the stutter, and some people might just be born homosexual. And I might be one of them. The jury's still out there on that. And I'm telling you this right now, nobody gets in their head like I do. I'm professional at that shit. Here's another example of getting in my head and fucking my shit up. I'm having trouble walking. It's been going on for mad long. I honestly don't know what the fuck is wrong with my walking, but it's been years since I've walked normal for extended periods. And even when it looks like I'm walking fine, internally there's still something going on when I'm stepping forward with my right foot. I'm pretty sure I don't have any type of physical condition affecting my walking. Something's wrong though, and I can't figure out what it is exactly. But now I'm totally in my head whenever I walk, which is all the time, and I can't get to the bottom of it because I can't figure out the deepest roots causing the issue. And it's exactly what I'm talking about, how there's a fine line between what's mental and physical. I'm pretty sure my walking struggle is identical to my struggles talking and performing sexually, where it's majority in my head, but there might also be a subtle physical problem throwing everything slightly off. And that goes hand in hand with what I'm saying, like how it's partially mental, but it's a slight physical problem causing a mental problem, highlighting the physical problem. And even if there's not a physical problem with my walking, I'm so in my head that it's reflecting physically, and I'm creating a physical problem by manifesting it mentally. I'm much more in my head about walking than I am stuttering, but I'm more in my head sexually than I am walking. In fact, I'm so fucking uptight sexually that might be what's fucking up my walking, because I just have so much built up pressure building up inside of me. But the overall point is, it's incredible how in my head I am with something as basic as walking, something I've done naturally ever since I've been consciously aware. And I never thought twice about it my whole life. If I'm so in my head about walking, imagine how in my head and how much I've overanalyzed my sexual performance. My walking issues might literally be stemming from all that built up pressure I feel from my sexual situation. And then I'm supposed to be excited if I hook up with a girl when I'm internally under so much pressure. For me, it's not even possible. You can't just make the pressure disappear. You have to somehow alleviate it. And it's just another metaphor for how I get in my head, which creates anxiousness and affects performance. To wrap up the episode, here's a few final examples of how everything in life is relative, and every part of who you are reflects sexually. Variables of our nature affect our sexuality and performance ability, and therefore certain people are pushed to the fringes and forced to reach deeper for arousal. I walk around flatline in life. It's like I'm always turned off, and it requires an extra spark to jumpstart my system and get me excited about anything. It feels like some people are out there just running on a track, and in my lane, there's like hurdles I gotta jump over at everything in life. I have terrible coordination. People who have good hand-eye coordination are always going to be better at performing sexually. People who can naturally hit a golf ball or hit a pitch in baseball, good shooters at basketball, are going to be better at getting their dick hard. It doesn't sound like it makes sense, but it's just a sport. It's athleticism. It's performance ability. It seems so disconnected, but it's all the ability some people have to control their body. And being coordinated matters in terms of getting your dick hard and performing sexually. I don't know if it's hand-eye coordination, but it's some type of coordination. You hear the ancient tales of centering your energy, and I think that's exactly what it is. Someone with good coordination has a pattern of centered energy in their nature. And don't get me into my golf swing. I just can't swing a club. I can't get the motion down. I had to stop playing because I was totally in my head about my swing every time I swung. And it just wasn't fun. And when you're so bad and in your head, it just becomes no fun. And this sets up another weird analogy. Real golf is more fun than mini golf. But if you're so terrible at real golf, then mini golf is more fun. And I think that's what happens with people who struggle performing sexually. Real sex done right is probably more fun than taboo or fetish sex. But if you can't perform in real sex, you just turn to taboo or fetish sex. I compare taboo or fetish sex to playing basketball on an 8-foot rim or playing basketball with girls. It's more fun to play on a 10-foot rim with men, but it's not fun if you're trash and if you're physically incapable of performing. It's like you're on the court, but you're not even there. So yeah, I'd rather play real basketball on a 10-foot rim with NBA players. But because of my skill level, it's technically more fun to play on an 8-foot rim or to play with girls, or specifically playing with girls on an 8-foot rim. I'd be dunking on everybody. You get in where you fit in life. And I think that's what a lot of homosexuality is. You rarely see a guy with mad options end up being gay. Any guy that gets chicks' pussies wet fucks the chicks. And here's what people miss when they talk about sexuality. Feeling attractive is the most understated aspect of arousal and possibly the deepest root pushing people towards homosexuality. So when I say homosexuality's roots might be mental, I'm saying it might stem from a deep subconscious belief that it's impossible for you to turn on the opposite gender. I'm not doubting anybody's nature, but I've seen extremely flamboyant dudes blown away by how hot a girl is. When a gay man is in awe by a woman's beauty, are you telling me that if that guy was in an orgy with both genders and that girl was a part of it, he wouldn't like seeing her turned on sexually? And I just don't think that he could ever imagine himself getting her there. But I mean, if they're all in an orgy where there's no pressure on him to get her there, I think that he would like looking at her. And I've been around enough guys to know that it's not far-fetched to think that if there was no stigma around homosexuality, that guys would have contests with their friends who could shoot the biggest load. And if they watch someone shoot a huge load, they will fucking go crazy, cracking up at the moment of the cum shot. Overall, I just don't think homosexuals are as gay as they think they are, and I don't think heterosexuals are as straight as they think they are. But as a society, we've created a construct that you're either one or the other. And it's so branded into our society that we label ourselves. And I think men with big dicks and women with good pussies are the ones who always naturally identify as heterosexual because they don't get pushed onto the fringes. On the fringes is men like me who don't perform well, live in their head, and feel inferior sexually. And these are the men who slide into the role of the nice guy. And girls who have always been told they're beautiful but don't feel sexy and like they attract nice guys are the prototype for females who exist on the fringes. And then if a girl on the fringes fucks with the nice guy on the fringes, it's lame and we push them towards homosexuality. But if they're with a man who's not on the fringes and he fucks them right, then he pulls them off the fringes. I kind of feel like chicks kind of like feel like they have a vagina until a dude shows them that they have a pussy. And like I keep talking about the fringes, like on the other side of the fringes is men who lack masculinity and females who aren't feminine, and that's who identifies as homosexual. And that's another way to get opened up sexually. Girls who can't find a guy to fuck the shit out of them, I feel like those are the type of girls who end up going to a girl. Until they have their first good sexual intercourse with a man, I feel like almost all girls are willing to try out girls. But it's kind of like if you are a person who exists on the fringes, what way are you going to be pulled? And it's kind of like you get in where you fit in. If you're the type of guy that needs a hot, slutty chick to open him up sexually, but you will never meet a hot, slutty chick who knows his situation is trying to open him up sexually, then you get pushed into the other side of the fringes. And there's always gay dudes who are willing to open you up. And like, that's the thing about like the nice guy energy. Like that nice guy energy is so lame to a girl, but a gay dude, like a flamboyant gay dude, they love that closet energy because they see it as a freak waiting to be unleashed. You know what I mean? And they know that if they could just get them in the room, that's exactly what that person needs to open up their sexuality. To me, the nice guy is closet energy. And if you have that nice guy closet energy, you radiate unattractive to females, but super attractive to homosexual males. And it turns into you get in where you fit in. I think we're just programmed to try to view sexual identity as a cut and dry construct where you're either this or you're that. But getting aroused is more complex than just if you're a straight man, you can instantly get hard and come quickly looking at any picture of a naked hot girl. Today, I might be able to come in 2 seconds looking at a picture, and then tomorrow I might not be able to get my dick hard trying to jerk off to that same photo. Arousal is extremely fickle. I think that's the most under-discussed thing when talking about sexuality, how fickle arousal is. The truth of arousal is complex. And there's a lot more of a gray area in sexuality than we're led to believe. But homosexuality is so stigmatized that if you exist in that gray area, then we identify you as gay. because we're so eager to label people as being this or that. But I think sexually we're more controlled by the variables of our nature than this cut and dry truth that some men love women and some men love men, and you're just randomly born one way or the other. And I think when we classify sexual identity as cut and dry, it's a construct we've created as a society. And maybe it's all wrong. Maybe when you're born, you are just born a man loving men, or you're born a man loving females. But I don't think it's random. I don't think that everything is all random. I think that what turns you on sexually and where you end up getting in sexually is determined by the perfect storm of variables that is your nature. Yeah. So that's it. So that's the Sexual Identity as a Construct episode. Trip of a lifetime. Let's fucking go.